Welcome to the podcast. Today we have a really special guest. This is the first episode, and in honor of that, we have invited Pastor Mike to the podcast. He has been the pastor of Redemption City for 11 years now, and he's going to be sharing with us how Redemption City came to be, where we are, and where we are headed to. So, check it out.
Man, great to be here. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Pastor Mike, thank you so much for joining us today for the podcast. This is something that we've been dreaming about for a little while now, and it's happening. It's so exciting.
Here we are.
To see how God has provided everything that we've needed, and now we are excited to see how God is going to use this to edify our church. And so, so thank you again for being here. I just want to start for all of us. I know that there might be some people who, they're very new to the church, and they're kind of like, I don't know what this church is about. I'm here to check it out and so whatnot. So why don't we start with this? Why don't we start with you sharing a little bit about your background? Like, okay, here is Pastor Mike. Yeah. Let's get to know him a little bit more.
Oh, man. Where do we begin? We begin?
So why don't we start with sharing a little of your family background?
Yeah.
I mean, start from Bartlett family, right? Growing up.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I've told you this, Sebastian, just a tremendous upbringing. I mean, we grew up in the mountains of northeastern Pennsylvania on a beautiful Christian camp. My parents were both devoted, committed Christians, incredible, just heroes as far as I'm concerned in terms of just faithfulness to God and doing ministry. And so, grew up in a beautiful area and really just getting to see God on the move. We're in Pennsylvania, bussed kids in from New York City and, Brooklyn, the Bronx, Harlem. And so really my upbringing with my parents was seeing my parents doing ministry up close and personal with kids from the inner city. And so as a kid, I'm just soaking up this beautiful camp scenery. I mean, I have my own gym, if you can imagine, my own, my own lake that I could go swim in, my own BB guns, archery range. I mean, I have my own horses. So it was really a beautiful, just natural place, but even more incredibly, just seeing God work amongst, kids from all over the country, but particularly inner city kids from the greater New York City area. And so, man, that just had a huge impact on my of just seeing my parents' faith lived out and seeing people's lives transformed literally before my eyes. So
what a blessing to grow up in a family like that. So for you, growing up with your parents doing full-time ministry, fully devoted, your whole family, as you got to be a teenager, what was that like for you being surrounded by ministry full-time, but maybe getting to a point where you're like, is this my parents' life? Yeah, our family, but is this my thing? Is this gonna be my thing?
Yeah.
How was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to sort it all out. I mean, so much of my life was just wrapped up with camp and ministry. We were part of an incredible church plant in Scranton. And so, so much of my life, this is just what we did. This is kind of who we were. And so it really wasn't until we moved from the camp down to South Jersey that really I was like, oh, there's a whole nother way of doing life. My dad ended up taking a job as a Christian school administrator. And so, we moved from this incredible place where God was moving into a whole different kind of space, which was not as healthy, as much spiritual vitality there. And so as teenager, I was kind of keeping up the Christian thing. But the way I would describe it is Christianity was more of a hobby. In high school. My consuming passion was more okay, I have lots of family members that are youth pastors and missionaries and doing beautiful ministry, camp ministry. But as I became a high school student, I'm like, is there anybody out there in the real world doing ministry? In the marketplace, in the public square? And so started getting a passion for man, maybe I could make a real impact in the world if I were like in government or a law or, something of that nature there too. So that just started to catch my attention. Also growing up like in ministry, I was like, man, if I could make a little money, drive a nice car, like, I could support all of my, my family members that are in ministry and love Jesus and, could live a good life while I was at it. So that definitely, heading into, I was like, I have a lot of ministry people. That was the world I knew. And so this other world out there was very alluring to me, interesting. And yeah, particularly I was heading into college. That was something I was like.
So you did mention, you made a brief comment that thinking of going into law, government, something like that. Yeah. So is that what you did for college when you went to college?
Yeah. So going into college, I was kind of like a little bit of a crisis as to what to do, where to go. And so as I was looking at my gifts and talents, I was like, man, I'd love to argue. I love academics. I don't like math. And so I had seen a few good, Tom Cruise movies, A Few Good Men or something. So like I figured, man, what a career to be in, arguing law before the highest courts. Went to college down at Liberty University in Virginia. And so, we were close enough to DC to really feel that was kind of in the air. Jerry Falwell was talking about being champions for Christ. And so I was like, well, where better to go than to Washington, D.C. in politics or as a lawyer. And so that was very much just kind of in the air in that era of my interesting era of my life. I thought, what a place. I could like serve God. I could make lots of money. And, I could have a very prestigious career and we'd all be happy. So,
yeah. So let me ask you this, just because in my personal experience, when I went to college, I went for medicine. I did pre-med and I was like, yeah, I'm going to be a doctor and all these things, right? But like for you, what was that like? Like you went for law, but now you're doing ministry. Like what happened?
Oh, gosh.
What was the change from?
God happened. This is a way of interrupting our, the best laid plans that we have established for ourselves. And so there's a lot of chiseling, I think, in my life, as God was working, kind of moving. But I think cruising through college like I did, graduated college in 3 years, like tested out of like an entire year's worth of classes. I was like in intercollegiate debate. Like I was doing all the things. I was like president his senior class, doing student government. So it all felt like everything's going according to plan.
Right.
And so it didn't feel as much like chiseling as more like getting hit by a bus. Like in my senior year, when I took my LSATs, the law school admission test, that I did not just like absolutely hit it out of the park. I was like, I'm going to go to Georgetown, one of the top schools in the country, because that's just the trajectory I'm on, because I'm a great person and God is going to bless me, and, because I'm honoring him and putting him first. And so when that didn't happen, when I scored like dead 50th on that test, I was just devastated. I just broke down into tears. Like I was an absolute mess. I remember just calling my mom and just being like, everything that I just done the last 3 years, my whole trajectory just totally got destroyed. All of my chances to get into the top tier law schools, were just kind of out the window. And so I was just incredibly, I think, devastated by that whole process. And so,
no, I feel that. I think one interesting thing to bring this, because I can relate to what you're saying. Mine happened differently, but I think it's such a God thing, because we can think, oh, well, you know what? Maybe so was ministry your plan B then? And I know that I've asked this for myself too, but it's like when you see how God orchestrated every single detail of your life to get you to that point, and then continue to see his faithfulness and what he continues to do, it's like, no, actually, like I was running away from plan A. Like God was bringing me back to plan A, to his will. And so like it's just a really cool thing to see. And so let's move from started college, that happened. After college, what was life after college for you then? What happened?
I love what you're kind of riffing off a little bit of the Jonah story there, just like running away from God's plan for your life, because I really do feel like that was, I'd grown up and seen God do incredible things. I've been a part of a dynamic like church plant in the inner city Scranton. Like I had seen God work in so many ways. So it's so crazy to me looking back that I was just like running in the opposite direction to something, that was just a totally new thing. And so it was interesting, like being really humbled. I had to move I got accepted into like one school that was like at the very bottom of my list of law schools to like make it into, like I didn't get accepted. And so I moved home for a year and I was like so devastated that I'm like, I can't even get over this. So I'm like, I'm going to take a gap year and go to seminary. Or my dad had gone to school because I'm like, I'm a wreck. And like everything I thought I knew about God and the wonderful plan he had for my life has not worked out for me. And so I was like, I'm going to take a gap year and just figure out what God is doing. So, I did what, any sensible person would do, like just go to seminary for a year. But, school was what I knew. And so academics were I was good at. And so I'm like, I'm going to go to schools where my dad, went to seminary, a little school, biblical theological seminary outside of Philadelphia. And kind of jumped in. And so I took kind of what was a hobby for me, the spiritual ministry world, theology, something I'd always had kind of a foot in, and really jumped back in like kind of full speed just to kind of see, God, what are you doing in the season? I'm going to give you a year. I'll waitlisted law school for a year. I'm like, I'll go back to law school if another path doesn't open. But if you're trying to get my attention, because clearly I'm very stubborn and I'm not, actually getting the message here, but I just want to be open and receptive to what God had for me. And so that year was really, incredible. The first year of seminary, I was like, here, I'm like studying this things that have been a part of my life, like, but I just never considered them vocationally. And here I was studying theology. I'm like, just having my view of God just blown away. And my professor for systematic theology was like invited me to be his teaching assistant. He's like, Mike, I think you've got like some future in this. The church that I was a part of was like, hey, could you be like our youth minister? And so, the seminary that I was a part of was like, hey, church planning is like really pushing church planning as a really innovative way to see churches advancing in more of a post-Christian context. And so all of these things are starting to come together. And I'm like, God, what are you doing here? Like this, it totally caught me off guard, but that was really the beginnings of like, oh, maybe this could be more than a hobby. It could be an actual vocation. And
so you mentioned that you had the opportunity to do youth ministry while you were going to seminary, all that. I can relate to that because I also had the opportunity to step into that when I started seminary, and right from the get-go, my first year, I was presented the opportunity to do that, and I stepped into that. And so for me, it was something very, very new. And so I just want to hear, like, what was your experience like now getting theological training and thinking more like, church planting, maybe this is where I can go. But now the Lord is taking me to youth ministry. Like, what was that like for you?
Yeah, no, that was weird. Frankly, I was still at this point in my law school like image here, and I was like, systematic theology, teaching assistant. Like, I can understand that. That sounds like it's got some prestige. Youth ministry to me was babysitting. I'm like, I am going to be sitting here babysitting a bunch of brats. Like, I'm like too good for this. And so the Lord was really humbling me and chiseling me through that process because I was just like, who are these little kids here? Like, I'm a graduate theology student. Like, I'm too good for this. And so the Lord has had a way of continuing to humble me through that. And youth ministry was great. As I got into that ministry, man, I was amazed at how open-minded these kids are. They wanted to explore the big ideas of theology, and they had big questions, and there was no filter. They just asked whatever was on their mind. And so I was literally blown away. And by the time I ended working with that first church, which, had me on as like a part-time seminary guy with zero ministry experience, formal church ministry experience. This group of kids like blew me away. Asking questions that I had no answers for. And I'm like, I don't even know I don't have a developed philosophy of ministry. I don't know how people become fully devoted followers of Jesus. I'm just like, I had a passion for God and for who he was. And we had this big vision of God, but like didn't really know what to do with it. So
I totally relate to that because so when I got to do ministry as well, I remember being asked questions that I'm like, even in seminary, we don't really talk about this because we don't even think of this little things. How did you come up with that? But one thing that I really appreciated about youth ministry when I stepped into that was that in a way I kind of forced, but like I had the opportunity to really expand expand and simplify my language of presenting the gospel. Because if you're able to share the gospel and make it clear for kids, then you're getting it, right?
Yes.
There's just a beauty about it. I remember when I first started, it was very much like, I'm bringing this all like heavy theological language because this is what I'm learning in seminary. And he would just go over their heads, right? And so eventually I learned that it is better to just present it simply and get to the point. And if they understand, then that means that you also understand it because you were able to present it well. I don't know if you can relate to that, but one thing that I always is still in my mind. It was this teaching that we were doing, and I'm like, okay, how do I get the kids to trust Jesus? Like that there's certainty with Jesus, and that they don't have to be perfect and this image that, and so I had a kid that loved basketball, and I remember just telling him, okay, if I was to give you like $1 million right now, and when we went, because at the church we had like a basketball court in there, so I told him, if we go to the basketball court and I just give you one shot to make the shot, one shot, but here's the catch: either you do it, or you could have Michael Jordan shoot it for you. Who would you choose? And he's like, well, it's a no-brainer, of course, Michael Jordan, right? Like, no-brainer. And I'm like, okay, well, even better is like, Jesus is the one who makes the shot for you. You don't have to shoot the shot. Like, Jesus does it for you. And so, little things like that that help you to explain the gospel in a way that it's understandable for kids. So I found that really valuable for just ministry overall, because now that I am doing this pastoral resident and all this, it's the same truth, and it's beautiful. And so I had I don't know if you can relate with this, but like this kind of like a love and not so much hate, but like love and not as much love for youth ministry, because I'm like, I felt that, like, I don't know, I feel wired to care for older people, but it was a beautiful season. And I think that everybody who wants to do ministry needs to start there.
It's great. I mean, youth are, I don't know if I just forgotten my own, like, I was a precocious teenager. I wanted to have the big conversations, and I don't know how I missed that, but it was such a treat. I mean, I did not enjoy the lock-ins till, hours and some of the goofy stuff that, youth ministry, the pizza, the diet of pizza and, pizza and Pepsi and whatnot. But man, boy, those kids really surprised me in their hunger for God's word. About the big questions and willingness to just go there. And man, I learned so much. And I really, by the time I was done that first part-time ministry thing, I was like, oh man, this is really a privilege to serve these kids. They're more insightful and more thoughtful than I would ever give him credit for. And now I look back and I go, man, the worst thing you can do for youth ministry is to set the bar just super low and just spoon feed them a bunch of nonsense. Like, these kids want big ideas. They want big dreams. They have big passions. Like, give them big theological truths. And they'll respond to that too. And even my misguided attempts to, and an incredible passion for concepts that, were not always clear. And
so from that point on, now you're in ministry, and I'm guessing you're trying to discern or decide, like, is this where I'm heading? Is this where the Lord is calling me and taking me? What was the transition like? Because I know one of the cool things that even when I talk to my friends and people, that they're like, what church do you go to? Redemption City. Oh, and my pastor, the fun fact, my pastor lived with John Piper. I think it's a really cool thing. How the whole transition, how did you get from youth ministry to, okay, now this is serious, I'm thinking maybe church planting. Like, what was that like for you?
I feel like this is another one of those situations where, like, man, youth ministry is a dead-end track. Like, I'm not going to go anywhere if I do this. And nothing could have been further from the truth. In some ways, when I was starting to, seminary had already given me a vision for church planting. But as I had spent some years in church, in youth ministry, and started to talk with church planners, I'm realizing youth ministers, actually, they preach sermons, to the youth. Like, they build teams, they cast vision, they take people on trips, they build small groups, they think about outreach and evangelism. Really, in many cases, the youth pastor is they're a mini pastor. They have their own little congregation. And so actually, I was like, you're actually learning a lot of things as a youth minister that really help you. I mean, how to engage the next generation. Right. I mean, so many things that are really helpful. And of course, as a 21-year-old, I thought, oh, I'm ready to go plant a church. And then everyone in my life was telling me that is the most terrible idea we've ever heard. Like, you are so immature. You have no idea what you're doing. And so God was gracious to give me some time with the youth to do that. And so they really helped, I think, prepare me for the work of church planting ministry. I mean, I think the other big thing, and I can't miss this part, is just how formative in my life getting married was during that time, meeting my wife in seminary. And like, I mean, I was such a seminary nerd. And I mean, I could talk all of the latest seminary controversies. But I mean, I was just not connecting well with people outside of that little niche and had a lot of passion. So I think part of the biggest finishing work God was just bringing my wife into my life to take this kind of nerdy, awkward, seminary guy whose like head was stuck in the books and all, and actually trying to bring me down to earth. And then also during that time, as we were growing together and learning about ministry, that's when, we started to explore, well, what's the next step? And that's when we found out about church planting residency at Bethlehem Baptist Church, a church where, kind of one of the big things I didn't mention earlier, as I was kind of torn there between law school and was reading one of John Piper's books, Desiring God, and just being like, oh, wait a minute, like, my actually joy in life could flow out of, who God is and what he's done. And like, this path to like riches and glory and fame, was maybe a false path. And so getting back into ministry, hearing about a residency with John Piper, I was like, this would be amazing. So, as a youth pastor, I was down in Florida at this time and had been working for a bunch of years down there on the beach. And so I just kind of put in an application and I was like, oh, I'll apply. I mean, there's no way I'm going to get into this place because John Piper is this kind of nationally recognized guy. He's written all these books and he's got this big platform. And so, nobody was surprised as I was when I got a call back and, got to sit in for an interview and all with these guys. And I'm like, whoa. So, really, really cool experience to be able to kind of, be welcomed into that program. And that was all a crazy story to begin with.
Yeah. So, okay, just a question for me, I guess. So once you got into the program, you actually stayed with John Piper?
Yeah. That was part of the big challenge for us. We're youth pastors, don't have a lot of money. So we were just kind of like, how are we going to afford to live in downtown Minneapolis? Yeah. We really want to be right there. We want to be in walking distance from the church. We want to just soak up the full experience. And we knew all the big luminaries, David Livingston, John Piper, Tom Steller, all the guys, Chuck Stedham, all lived right downtown. Kenny Stokes, everybody was like right, there in the city. And so we're just like, man, like we have got to be downtown, but there's no way we could afford to live in any of these neighborhoods. And so, we were just like, kind of like, man, I talked to our residency coordinator. I'm like, I don't know what we're going to do. Like, we can't afford $2,000 a month for these really cool condos. And, lo and behold, my residency coordinator comes back and he's like, hey, we found an opening for you, don't get too excited, but you could live in John Piper's basement. And I
would be just,
I almost was just like, oh my gosh, my eyes just get kind of big. I'm like, and here's his number, give him a call, he'll explain it. And, he was just like, wow, it's a basement. And so, it's just a, walkout apartment, nothing exciting. And I was like, what? So obviously to be there in the mix and be able to spend time, rub elbows with some of these incredible ministry people was just something. I'm like, as a youth pastor, in his 20s, I was like, what an incredible privilege to be there and getting to experience life in their household and hear, them kind of singing psalms as through the floorboards as they're doing family worship, and to have lunch with them, on Sundays after church. And it's just an incredible community there in Minneapolis in that era. So
let me ask you this, because now at this point you're, I'm considering church planting. I'm going to be a church planting resident. I'm living with John Piper. I'm going to do a training with him. I'm assuming you probably got the opportunity to preach.
Oh man,
at his church.
Yeah, wow.
What was that like?
Yeah, oh my gosh. Yeah, that is just, really crazy. I had both preaching at Bethlehem, which, I mean, you're preaching at John Piper's church to John Piper and Noel. But then I also did a Wednesday night class, with, I don't know, 100, 200 people with John and Noel sitting in the back row. And I don't know which was more intimidating, having the full church there or being in the back row with them there. But man, what a privilege to be able to preach there. And it was really cool because my sermon title for the sermon I picked was Risk is Right, which was one of the chapters of John's books. And so it felt like a little bit like this is I'm quoting John in John's pulpit. It's like a tribute to one of my heroes in ministry. And so, it really felt like, wow, what a beautiful opportunity to honor the people that have really made an impact in my life. And to be able to share some of that same passion, and hopefully carry forward that same legacy of kind of radical risk taking for the glory of God. I was like, let's go, man.
So now thinking about taking the risk, right?
Oh man,
we move forward from your residency is done. Now it's go time in a way.
Yes.
Walk me through that.
Yeah, man.
Because if I was, I'm thinking if I was you, I would be terrified. I'm like, okay, now what do we do? Church plant? How do we start? What do we do? Where do we go? Right? Like, what was that like for you?
Yeah, some guys have they're like locked in when they do church planting. They know where they want to plant. They have the community. They have the friends. They have the team. Like everything lined up. So it's just a matter of like going through the process, checking the dots and going. We didn't have that. Like I had, cut my teeth in Philadelphia, youth ministry seminary. Then I moved to Florida for 4 years of doing ministry down there. And then we were in Minneapolis for a year. And so we're like, do we go back to Philly? Do we, go back to Florida? Do we plant the Twin Cities? Bethlehem's planting churches in that area, or do we look somewhere else? And so we really didn't have a real strong call to plant a church, but not a strong call to a local community. So that was like a huge kind of like part. I mean, the biggest part of the church planting was just discernment of what God was going to do. And so at that point we're praying and I'm praying, God, bring us back to Pennsylvania. I would love to be back. Philadelphia area, man, working on the East Coast in a major city out there. Like how incredible would that be? Working with some seminary buddies there. And so we had some opportunities in Pennsylvania and some really cool opportunities to go back there. But my wife is a native of the wonderful city of Grand Rapids.
That's how you
and started praying very hard about moving over back home. We were having a couple kids at that point, and she's like, "What about Grand Rapids?" And so I was like, "Well, I'll go over there to a visit." And part of the beauty of being in a residency, you could just take some trips, just some exploratory trips to pray. And so I'm like, "Look, I will go over there, man. I will pray. I will fast. We'll see if God is going to open the door. I'll meet with, a bunch of pastors from the area and see if any doors are open. I'm assuming they're all going to close because there's 1,000 churches in Grand Rapids, in case you didn't know, and there's Christian colleges and publishing. And so, I was very much coming to Grand Rapids with the sense of this would be really silly to plant a new church. And even John Piper was kind of like, why would you go to Grand Rapids? I mean, all the publishing stuff. So it was not really on my radar as a serious opportunity. But when we actually came over here, and I prayed, fasted, I'm like, I'm going to do the due diligence. I'm going to meet with the people. And it was almost like miraculous, like just doors opening with local churches, local pastors, people just talking like, man, we need a gospel-centered church in the heart of this city. There's so many opportunities for ministry to happen here. I mean, obviously lots of religion, lots of traditional religion here, but when you come into the heart of the city, it's a very different world, and it has continued to be over these years. So that started steering me here, and particularly a partnership with Crossroads Bible Church, which ended up being a place we'd spend a whole year in ministry here, ended up just being a huge partnership. Just their generosity to just kind of open the doors for us to office there, to meet there. They're like, man, we love church plants and church planting. And so despite my best efforts to convince everyone that I should be planting somewhere else, God, man,
brought you here.
God brought us to Grand Rapids. Wow. And so me kicking and screaming, like so many times in my life, I feel like, here we are.
Yeah, that is really, and I'm so glad that that's what happened, because, I mean, I'm here and I love the fact that we are here. And so for Redemption City, now you're in Grand Rapids, and this church plant is starting. What are the partnerships that we have that helped us to start this church?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, really, as I was coming to town, I knew nobody. My wife had grown up there. And so she was like, and her time there was not like, she was trying to get away from Grand Rapids because she had lived pretty crazy life, has a pretty crazy testimony. I'll let her get on the podcast sometime and share some of her life in West. But she's like, the West Michigan I knew were not like the good church folks. And so, so she didn't have a lot of great connections, and her family was in slightly different tradition, kind of faith tradition there. And so we were like, where do we go? And so Crossroads Bible Church was a church that when I was at Bethlehem, they said, hey, you need to talk to these guys. And so Rod Van Salkma at Crossroads was just an incredible support to our church. I mean, I met with him and he was just like, man, we love church planners. We love young guys around here. We would love to have you at our church. And so the connections I made there were just invaluable and continue to this day to be incredibly valuable. I'm just blown away still by the generosity of that church and welcoming this guy, you know, who has a big dream to plant a church, but really no connections other than that, just trying to get established. And so they just genuinely just opened the door and they're like, hey, you could be here for as long as you want, learn about the city, learn what church planting. They had planted their church about 7 years ago and it was dynamic. Gospel preaching church. I was like, this is, I had no idea there was anything like this in Grand Rapids. And there wasn't. I mean, that was the one strong like gospel preaching church in the city that I met. And I was just like, wow.
And they let you use their building, right?
Yeah, they gave me office space there. I mean, they're like, hey, you can be in here, hang out in our staff meetings, part of their preaching cohorts. I mean, they're like, they just took me under their wing that whole year. I remember, you know, hanging out with some of their young guys, like Dave Giroux was there at the time, and I'm officing with him. And so I'm mixing it up with all of their leaders and planners and worship leaders. And so, I mean, they just helped us out in so many incredible ways in terms of resources and knowledge and we would have never made it without that additional help. And then that year of getting to know Grand Rapids meant that I was able to get out, network, meet with people, buy hundreds and hundreds of people coffee, you know, to build relationships in the neighborhood, start doing outreach and like figure out what are the real genuine needs here in this city, you know, where can our church partner and connect? What are the spiritual needs? You know, what are the material needs in an area like Easttown where we ended up kind of planting? And so, it was an incredible year too, to just see a church plant that had learned how to really preach the gospel well in that community. And Rod had grown up in Grand Rapids and knew the area. So just to see how he was engaging, I'm from the East Coast. And so, you know, I just grew up in a different world, much more kind of intellectual, fast-paced. You know, moving to the Midwest was just a little bit of a culture shock for me. And so, you know, my wife was right at home, but I was just like, what have I got? And Grand Rapids, anybody who's been to Grand Rapids knows, I mean, it's just an interesting city with all the different, you know, the Dutch culture there and, you know, all the churches. I mean, there were so many jokes about it being Steepletown or Jerusalem or all of these corny jokes that were going around, just how churchy Grand Rapids was. And, you know, I was just nerding out the libraries, the bookstore. I mean, just,
When I moved, from California to here, everything that you're saying, I'm right there with you. I'm like, what? This is so different. It's such a shock. The most crazy thing for me was walking around. I mean, I went to Cornerstone, and so like even walking down the street and like just walking around town, it almost felt like there was a church at almost every corner. Yeah, and so it makes you wonder, like so many churches, like. Is everybody Christian?
I think they had a Guinness Book of World Records, honestly, for like the most churches on one street. Somebody told me like Lake Michigan Drive is actually in the, I don't know if that's true or not, but it was, and I would literally have never, but my wife was like, trust me, this is not the world I grew up in. I went to Sparta High School. She's like, I got friends that are porn stars that are on their third marriage. Like, you know, the world, she was just up the road in Sparta. Like, I mean, there was some just crazy, I was just like, whoa, this is a very different world that you experienced. And she's like, we would drive over to Canada and go drinking when we were, you know, because you could drink as a teenager. Right. And so her world was just, so I would never have known that there was another side of Grand Rapids unless she'd been telling me, like, look past the veneer, look past the the colleges and seminaries and bookstores. There's a different Grand Rapids here. And in fact, the Christian Grand Rapids and the non-Christian are kind of like oil and water. They don't mix a lot. And so you wouldn't even know if you were running in certain circles at Grand Rapids Christian or at Calvin or Cornerstone that there was another world here in Grand Rapids. And particularly in the city, particularly in Easttown, that community was one of those kind of alternative communities pursuing different spirituality, sexuality. I mean, all of the things. That was the place where all the, people that were running away from Christian were going at that time. And that to me was like, ooh, this is interesting. This is a challenge here, working with a bunch of millennials who were just trying to figure life out.
So now going from Crossroads is helping us. We have planted the church. We're meeting. I cannot imagine the challenges, right? Just because you're starting something new, and yes, you have the support, but at the same time, I feel like a lot was laid on your shoulders because now you're like, okay, how do we make this happen, right? And now you have to make all the kinds of decisions, and you try to get people to be a part of what God is doing in the church plan, right? And so I'm interested about this because when I came to Redemption City, we were already meeting at Aquinas. So it was a few years in already. And so by then, Redemption City looked different.
Pretty stable at that point, right?
Than at the beginning. So what were like the challenges that you went through as Redemption City was starting?
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, even moving over to Grand Rapids, we went all in and we're like, well, if God is calling us here, all the support from everybody we're talking to is saying go. So we moved. I mean, we took all of our life savings and bought a house. So we just went kind of all into Grand Rapids, but it was wild that first year we moved here and, I'm like, I could start the church right away and kind of have that kind of revenue stream going. But I'm like, we would be way healthier if we spent a year just in between, residency at Bethlehem and just getting ready. We're about to have our third kid. So man, it'd be so great if we could just have a year to just get to know people here. And so one of the crazy things that happened during that season is that Bethlehem was like, yeah, we don't know what happened to any of your money here of as a church. So we moved over here and they're like, yeah, we don't know what happened to your money there. And so I got here and, of course I've got, 2 kids, a third on the way. We just bought a house. We're getting settled. Goodness. And they're little yeah, we don't have any money here. You're going to have to figure this out. And I'm like, I don't have any money. I just, blew my life savings on, getting moved in. And so we were literally just what do we do here? We're just putting everything on the credit card. So we were 3 months of just, and I should have known better because all the older churchmen warn you, there are going to be these crazy things that happen whenever you plant a church, that are just going to happen that there's no explanation for. But here we are 3 months, not getting a paycheck and just I'm putting money on a credit card. I'm running up. I'm Dave Ramsey is going to kill me. This is insane. I've got thousands of dollars of credit. What is happening? I'm I know we've got supporters and people, but it was just this weird thing. And I'm God clearly wanted to test us and really put us through the fire a little. Church planting is such a step of faith. And so I think the finance side of it is a big one. And so we literally, that was the most nerve-wracking Christmas I ever had because we went into the Christmas season just not having any clue where our financial state was. We were what's happening? We weren't really planted yet, but we had kind of passed the residency phase. And so, that was probably the craziest thing. We go into January of that year and Bethlehem's oh yeah, here's our, we got a $60,000-$70,000 check to send over to you of all the money from your account. And I'm where was that? Where was that the last? And then, Crossroads is well, we're going to cut you a check for this amount of money. And then Riverview Church over in Lansing, I'm calling and, Noel Haken for there. I was oh yeah, we're going to give you a huge check to help you guys start. And so, it just felt like there was this wall kind of when I got here of resistance. And we were just trusting God to provide and meet our needs. But it was terrifying because I didn't want to let anybody know that hey, I'm this church planter, but I don't have any money. I don't know what I'm doing. So much I'm just what is happening? So, but it was crazy coming into that next year. And then, from there on out, it was just kind of financially we're stable. Everything's fine. But such a bizarre test of faith right out of the. And so for anybody who's church planted, I think they can testify to something crazy like that, an illness in their family or, their house burns down or something insane, finances goes wrong. But that was probably right out of the gate. I'm we just moved, our whole family, like, just take out
Whoa.
risk is right, man. We're taking a step of faith. And then we're just like, God, what are you doing to us?
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, what a way to testify about God's faithfulness, right? Like it is so true. And even in situations like that, we can see that if God is the one who's calling us, like, it doesn't stop there. Like, God doesn't just say, I'm calling you to go there, so just go and figure it out. Like, the beauty of it is God is calling us, and he equips us and sustains us. And, like, it's all because of his faithfulness. And so it is crazy. I would be, I mean, I'm sure you felt overwhelmed when you went through that. But man, like, what a test of faith.
You learn to trust God. I mean, for daily bread, you're like, all right, God, you're going to have to provide. You called us here. And so yeah, whenever I talk to anybody who's raising funds and ministry, I'm like, man, it is probably the greatest test you're going to go through, just raising money, living by faith in that way, and watching God provide. And we've seen that over and over and over again. And it's crazy now. I look at, like, man, raising that first big chunk of money, and now I'm like, oh yeah, raising, another, it's like 100,000. The numbers keep getting bigger.
Right.
But I will say, I think the hardest amount of money to raise was that first $25,000 or something we raised for our residency, and just to see God move through that. I think money is often not something church planners talk about, or it's kind of more in the behind the scenes, the ugly, how all that kind of background stuff works and all, but boy, it's amazing how God teaches you faith through all that. And so, I mean.
So now, Redemption City has been planted.
Yeah.
We go from Crossroads to, like I even previously mentioned, Aquinas.
Yeah.
How old is our church now?
Yeah. So yeah, we were just a baby church, at Aquinas for, I don't know, about 8 years, I guess. Yeah. And beautiful season. I loved the time. We're meeting at a campus, so everything was just set up church. So all ministry was happening in homes. Yeah. I'm learning. I'm like a, very young 30s, just trying to figure everything out. And so that season, I mean, to this day, is so sweet. The people that were a part of that original core group, original part of small groups, meeting in homes. I mean, it was just a really beautiful season to grow up as a pastor. But stepping into this, season, fast forward, the church is now 10 years old, and we've got a building, we're able to hire another staff member. And so, all that happened really quickly. I mean, for me, like I remember Mark Dever saying, like, don't overestimate, what God is going to do in 5 years, but don't underestimate what God can do in 10 years. And that's been very much my experience in church planning. I know I was coming into town and thinking, man, this church is going to blow up. I mean, it's going to be incredible. We're going to impact the city. Like, the glory of God is going to fall on Grand Rapids, and, there's going to be a revival. And, that was, and then like 5 years in, we're just like, this is way harder than I thought. It's been sweet. It's been fun, but boy, to stay the journey. And then 10 years in, we're like, wait a minute, here we are in this new church building. We're in the new podcast studio. We've got another pastor on staff, and we're talking about building renovations. Like, I'm just like, how on earth did that happen? I mean, the only thing I can count for is incredible grace of God in that process. Just sustaining and building a church. So
it's been incredible, and I think. For me, I mean, when I started to go to Redemption City, that was back when we were at Aquinas, and I remember even like back then, which now I laugh because it's like, oh man, but I remember when I started to serve in the worship team and all that with Drew and Josh and Ethan, that we would have to set up every single Sunday.
Oh my gosh!
And I remember sometimes, especially Michigan in the winter, the snow. I remember sometimes it being like 7 a.m. and we're like using hair dryers.
The lock is frozen.
Yes, because the locks of the trailer would be frozen. We're like trying to defrost them last minute and like blowing on them and everything just so that we can get things going. And so like I think that there's so much work that goes behind being a church plant. But it's beautiful.
I think it's character forming.
Yes,
sure.
Because I think that you constantly get reminded that the labor that we do for the sake of the gospel is never in vain. And so you think back of those years of the difficulties and the challenges and how we started, how we've grown and where God has taken us. And it all, I think it all points to God's faithfulness and the beauty of being agents of the kingdom and laboring for God's kingdom and spreading the gospel. And I think that that's a beautiful thing. And so to have, not only to have, but to be a part of a church like ours, who has gone through that and still stands firm and testify of God's faithfulness, I think it's beautiful. And so to see how we've gotten from that point to where we are now, the question is, okay, in light of God's faithfulness and what we've seen and what God has done in our church, where are we headed?
Yeah.
Right? Yes, we celebrate the 10 years, but where do we see ourselves in the next 5, 10, 20 years? How are we going to see God's faithfulness through all this? Like, if you can share with us a little bit of maybe the vision of like, where are we headed? Like, what do we want to see God do in our church, let's say the next year or the next 5 years?
Yeah, well, that's a great question too. And I want to even flesh out, I was talking about the grace of God before, but man, so many people contributed to the life of this church, making it what it is. So, too many people to even name. But I do say you don't plant a church by yourself, and so I think God's faithfulness plus a lot of brothers and sisters in Christ who rolled up their sleeves and came alongside in that work and that ministry. And I am incredibly humbled and thankful to be able to serve. And I know our 10-year anniversary, I was almost in tears just thinking about all the people that have started. I mean, obviously you were part of that season. So many of us who spent so many years just kind of working in that, the scruffiness of church planning and the obscurity of that. And so, I don't want to pass that by, man. And if you are listening to this podcast and you're one of those people that have been with us for that, thank you. What some sweet memories from that. But where are we going into the future? I think what I would say is, I think the same passions that were engaging me when I moved into the city are still the same passions that are driving me. I'm really energized by working with college and seminary students and all. I'm still like a youth pastor in some ways, right? All of the questions they have, the energy, the challenges, they still excite me. And I think there's something just incredible about that journey from becoming a teenager, to, getting out of the house, making your faith your own, trying to figure out what are you going to do with your life in college, finding a career, a vocation, a calling from God, and figuring out how to start at the bottom of the ladder and work, into a career job, relationships, navigating singleness, marriage, children. To me, all of those things are still incredibly energizing. And I think maybe even more personal to me now with having teenagers having 2 teenagers of my own now, who are just stepping into that. I really love seeing the next generation kind of really discover the faith and make it their own. And so, I feel like we started with millennials, 10 years ago, and we're able to kind of walk through that 10-year church planting season with a bunch of millennials and try to think, how do we do life as Christians together? And I think that same passion still energizes me as we think about Gen Z and Gen Alpha and this next generation. And I would say the other thing that still energizes me, I think, is being in the city. There's something about the city, the diversity, the density, the cultural energy that happens in a city. You're just challenged in different ways than you would be maybe if you're out in the suburbs, which are a little more monocultural, or out in this more rural areas that haven't been impacted by all of the rapid change around us, the rapid cultural changes. And I'm still just really energized. I know a lot of families have moved back out to the suburbs now. And so we're still here in the city because we love the challenges and the opportunities that are here presented by all of the beautiful diversity that's here. Just the sheer amount. There's so many people that live in the city, the opportunities that are here, challenges are here. They still fire me up, and they are really exciting to me, to the mix. That challenge of working with students and being around seminaries where there's all the, latest theological ideas, ministry concepts, newest missional innovation. All of those things are things that still excite me. And so I think some of my big hopes really for this next 10 years are just to step into that more formally, that we can be a church for emerging generations to make their faith their own. own. And I know that's one of your big passions,
Yes.
being in youth ministry, working with student ministries, working at a college, working with college students for so many years, just how to help that next generation be a bridge for these students that are trying to make their faith their own. And also, I hope that our church could be a place for the next generation leaders to be raised up. One of the things that, as you know, it's been captured my imagination over the last years is just the idea of like a residency. Like Grand Rapids is a big medical town. You know, we've got the medical mile, and we've had tons of medical residents come to town over those years. For some reason, I'm amazed how many doctors at our little church that we've had. But these doctors, they come and they do all the schooling, but they need a residency. So they come for a year or 2 years, or depending on how many postdoctoral fellowships they had, and they're here in the hospital learning, getting hands-on experience. And that's something that is a big passion of mine, that we would be a place for seminary students to be able to get that hands-on training. What does gospel ministry look like in the nitty-gritty? Like, get your hands dirty, roll up your sleeves, kind of.
I mean, I celebrate that big time, because I benefited from that, and I've seen the good that comes out of that, of partnering with those who at some point, or I mean, that are at where you were before. And even now I feel a little bit like that. Like, man, like what a blessing it is for me to have somebody even like you as a mentor that I can look at and I can see how God worked in your life, through your life, and now in the church, and I get to see all this firsthand. And so there's such a great value in being able to have that for others, for the generations that are stepping up to the plate, right? That God is calling them and are starting, and so now it's just a blessing to be able to walk alongside them as you're doing with me.
It's
even.
cool, and it's, I mean, in some ways, like your residency is kind of the call. We've been wanting to do this full time. We have had seminary students here for many years, and the church could never have made it without seminary students. If you're one of the seminary students on this call, thank you. This church could not have made it without your help throughout the years. But being able to bring you on, Sebastian, full time is just such an encouraging thing to say, man, we can now bring students in and give them an even more full-time instead of doing seminary, working a job and trying to do 18,000 other things. I think so that ministry residency thing, I mean, obviously for church planting is a big passion, being a part of, I don't think we've mentioned Acts 29 yet on this call, but being a part of churches, planting churches, like that is very much our heartbeat. And so I think raising up the next generation of leaders to do that. I think also of just expanding our impact in a couple of different areas. I think city ministries, huge impact, where I would love to see our church be able to reach out and do some of the really interesting needs that our city has. I talked about the density and diversity of a city, right? I mean, that means there's lots of socioeconomic diversity, and we're right in between the most affluent neighborhood and the poorest neighborhood in the city of Grand Rapids. And so we have incredible opportunities. There are racial barriers that in a city with historic segregation, redlining, all of that. And so you'll have to interview my wife to talk more about
which I'm excited
all
about
of the
that,
city initiatives and some of the cool stuff that she's doing in that space. But man, I am really excited to see our church, now that we actually have a bricks and mortar presence in the city, be able to really open our doors, be a mission outpost here in the city, and be a city on hill, be a light in a city that's obviously, as culture is going more progressive directions, we get to be hopefully a faithful witness to Jesus here in the heart of this city. Excited about our global ministry opportunities, partnerships. I mean, I think of guys like Kerem, coach in Antalya, Turkey, who's helping lead church planting efforts and theological education. Think of our good buddy Andrew Panaggio, who was here for many years, was at GRTS, is now doing his PhD studies at Wheaton, and wants to bring that theological education back to Peru. And so I think, man, to build some of these long-term partnerships globally be huge, and of course do more church planting. And who knows, as these residents emerge, where church plant, maybe you'll be the next church planter coming out of this pipeline. There's so many guys in the city, great guys who are doing ministry, and I really hope we can plant more churches in this next decade, that we can see a couple of church plants coming out of our church. And so those are a couple of my, I think, hopes and dreams, probably many more, but that might whet people's appetite a little bit for some of the things I'm passionate about and excited about.
I think for those who maybe are tuning into this podcast, right, and that are wanting to possibly know a little bit more about our church, right? We talked about like the history of the church more than anything. And we are sharing not only the struggles, how we've seen God's faithfulness, but also what our dreams are and like what we want to see God continue to do here at Redemption City. If there's somebody new that is interested in our church, and they want to know more about, I want to know more about what you guys believe, because that's a huge factor in coming to a church, agreeing theologically and all that, to be able to grow together. What can we give them if they want to more about what it is that we preach about, what we're all about? Where can they find this information? Like, what do we do to help them with that?
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite things to do is do a pastor's coffee with new people. We try to do those every month, where you get to sit down with the pastors. We get to hear your story. You can hear a little, not this in depth of the story of the church, and get to hear some of our background and influences, and we can answer your questions of theology, how to get plugged in, how to get involved, how to serve, those kind of things. And so, Pastor's Coffee is a wonderful opportunity to learn more. And obviously on our website, you can also check out some of our ministry partners, the Gospel Coalition, Acts 29, Treasure in Christ Together, some of those partnerships with Bethlehem Baptist. Those all will give you a pretty good flavor, I think, of where we're coming from.
So the Pastor's Coffee, does that normally happen after church?
Yes.
Sundays?
Yeah. Sundays right after church. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to sign up. It's there. Just come. We'll have a little coffee and hopefully some tasty treats, and get to talk through some of the vision. And so, that's always, like I said, if you're new, first way to get connected, get to meet the team. And it's a really wonderful.
I mean, I'm personally excited because it is through that, when we meet for Pastor's Coffee, that I'm able to hear stories of how God has worked in the life of others, and now they're coming to our church, checking out what we're all about. I get to know them and they get to know us, and it's sweet. And so I'm really excited for the one that is happening on September 10th.
Yes.
That we're going to have right after the service, which is full lunch, actually, which is really exciting.
We're going all out.
So we'll be meeting, and it's exciting. I'm looking forward to that. So.
And as a pastor, I just, that's one of those things where I'm just, I wish I could meet with every single person in the church. And as it grows, I don't have that. So, man, for people to be able to come and show up to that, I mean, it means a lot to me, obviously, getting to know people and get to hear the stories, meet them personally. And it's a powerful thing, hopefully helpful for people, and something as a pastor is a huge privilege for me too. Yeah.
Well, Mike, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us in the podcast today. This has been great. I mean, I feel like I knew kind of like the story, like your story and the story of the church, but man, this was so good. I feel like I know you more now. And so it's a blessing. I just want to say thank you so much for your willingness to share your time with us. And I'm just excited to see what the Lord is going to continue to do here at Redemption City, and how he's going to use us to expand his kingdom, right? To preach the gospel boldly and see Jesus transform the heart of people. And so I'm excited for that. And so, again, thank you so much. I don't know, is there anything that you would like to say as we close for the podcast today?
Yeah, just big thank yous to you guys for putting this together, for setting this up. I just get to roll in here and hang out. So, huge shout out to you, Sebastian, obviously putting the podcast together, for David on production and some of the mixing and work. I mean, this stuff doesn't happen without a village, a team of volunteers who've been working to put this together. And, that's just a huge privilege about where we're at as a church, and just a testimony to God's faithfulness here.
Amen.
So thank you guys.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And I'm just excited. I'll just say this for you who listened through the whole podcast. I'm excited for the next episodes to come, where we're going to get to talk about other things such as worship, and why does that matter, or hermeneutics, how do we read the Bible, and how can we grow as Christians in our faith, and all of these things. It's going to be really exciting. So make sure you tune in. Thank you for sharing your time with us. And this has been the first episode, and this is it. Thank you to everyone.